My family said there was no room for me at the reunion. Their faces turned pale when I handed them the house keys. It was a cheerful email full of emojis and exclamation points, signed warmly by my older sister Madeline. It was also addressed to everyone, all of you, and our favourite crew, but somehow nowhere in the email was my name. Not even once. I stared at the screen for a long minute, the email glowing like a silent judgment on my worth. And just like that, the familiar weight returned heavy in my chest. "You look like you just read a bad Yelp review," Remy said, leaning over my cubicle wall with a paper cup of coffee in hand. His voice pulled me back into the office. "It's nothing," I replied quickly, minimizing the browser window. "Family thing?" he asked. I hesitated. "Reunion email." Remy tilted his head. "Let me guess. They forgot to include you again." I gave a tight smile. He sighed. "Elena, why do you let this get to you? They've stopped caring years ago. Why haven't you—" I turned back to my screen, my reflection faint on the black surface. I thought I had learned how to live with exclusion. But recurring pain has its own cunning way of carving deeper each time. "It doesn't bother me," I lied. "I just wasn't expecting it today." He gave me a long look, then nodded slowly, choosing not to push. After he walked away, I opened the email again. Scroll, smiley faces, photos from last year. "Can't wait to see everyone again," Madeline had written. I could almost hear her voice chipper and performative, like she was always performing for a camera that only she could see. My name wasn't in any of the captions, not that I was in the pictures either. I leaned back and let my eyes close, the weight of years pressed in. I remembered every birthday invitation I'd sent as a teenager, printed with glitter stickers and mailed with a hopeful heart. No one came. No one replied. On my 18th birthday, I waited 3 hours at the restaurant before realising the RSVP silence wasn't forgetfulness. It was indifference. I had learned to blow out my candles alone. Now, here I was, 34, a senior strategy executive at Whitmore and Lynn, with a corner office and 2 international mergers under my belt, still waiting for a personal invitation to my own family. My phone buzzed. Savannah. Savannah. Another year, another family reunion email. Me bingo. Take a guess how long until Mum calls, with a very valid excuse about limited space. Her reply came instantly. Savannah. $10 says she blames Madeline's twins for needing their growth-friendly sleep zones. I smiled the first genuine smile of the day. That was when the phone rang. Eleanor, sweetheart. My mother's voice flowed over the line like syrup, sweet and suffocating. About the beach house this year. Let me guess, I interrupted. It's full. Madeline's kids need the bunk room. Or Jeremy's bringing a new girlfriend who absolutely can't stay at a motel. There was a pause, an awkward inhale. You know how it is, she said, her tone flattening. Madeline's children are at such a crucial age. Always at a crucial age, always needing space, always having priority. I glanced at the folder on my desk promotion letter, International Role Hong Kong headquarters. I hadn't told them. Why would I? They never asked. Yeah, I said. I know exactly how it is. After I hung up, I sat motionless. Not sad, not angry, something else, determined. I opened a blank note on my tablet, typed 2 words this time, because this year I wasn't coming uninvited. This year I was already there. They just didn't know it yet. I remembered the way I used to decorate invitations, when I was 12 metallic pens confetti inside each envelope the whole 9 yards. It was always me putting in the effort, and it was always them finding a reason not to show up. Dad had once called to cancel an hour before my sweet 16. Jeremy had soccer practice. Madeline had a debate meeting. Mum had to drive someone somewhere. Eventually, I stopped expecting. But expectations like ghosts don't disappear just because you close the door. They hang around, they whisper. I kept their old voicemails. Sometimes when I felt particularly masochistic, I'd play one just to remind myself what affection sounded like when it was manufactured. Most of them sounded the same. "Hi, Eleanor. Sorry we couldn't make it. You know how things get. Next time, okay. Love you. Next time. Always next time." But the next time never came. Because I was never the priority. Not until now. Now they would see. Not in vengeance, not even in anger, but in clarity, in proof, in undeniable, sparkling, concrete success. I looked again at the subject line of the email. Brooks Family Reunion. Save the date. I clicked archive without reading further, because I already had the date saved, and more importantly, I had the deed. And this year, I was sending the invitation in my own way. They say photographs capture the memory, but what they don't tell you is they also expose absence. Growing up, I was always the one holding the camera. Not by passion, not by talent, but by unspoken assignment. I wasn't the subject of the story. I was the hand that documented it. "Sweetheart," my mother Vivian would say, voice light and dismissive, "Can you take one for us? Let your sister stand next to Dad." And just like that, I was erased again, this time with a smile and a flash. I remember one 4th of July at the lake. The whole family gathered around the picnic blanket, fireworks crackling overhead. I reached for the camera, thinking maybe someone would offer to take one so I could join. No one did. Instead, Madeline beamed. Jeremy posed, and I adjusted the lens. Snap. Another family memory I didn't exist in. One afternoon, when I was 10, I tried drawing what I couldn't say out loud. It was a picture of our old yellow house. Everyone was outside on the lawn, Mum in her sundress, Dad in his usual polo Jeremy chasing the dog, Madeline with a popsicle, and in the window a little girl sitting alone looking out. I didn't think about it much as I drew it. It just came out. When I showed it to Mum, she smiled politely. "That's very imaginative, Eleanor. Why didn't you draw yourself outside with everyone I'm in the window?" I whispered. She didn't hear or didn't want to. She tucked the drawing into a drawer. I never saw it again. I spent so many childhood birthdays handing out invitations that no one RSVP'd to. I hosted tea parties with one teacup, made name cards that stayed blank, and the photos, the ones that lined the hallway of our beach house, never had my face. Once I dared to ask why. "Don't be dramatic," Mum said, turning from the stove. "Of course you're in there somewhere." But I wasn't. I knew every frame, every smile, every moment where I was probably just outside the border, holding the camera steady. Turns out I was never the forgotten one. I was the one never allowed in to begin with. Savannah, my best friend since grade school, once gave me a disposable camera for my 12th birthday. "So you can take photos of yourself," she said, grinning. I never developed the role. It felt too sad, too obvious. A collection of empty rooms, blurry mirrors and half faces. Looking back, I realised I wasn't just missing from the photos, I was missing from their narrative, their memories, their idea of who we were as a family. I was the space between their stories. 1. Thanksgiving. I came across an old shoebox while looking for decorations. Inside, school awards, a programme from a spelling bee, and my art camp certificate. All mine. None of them were displayed. None framed. Just tossed into a dusty box beneath Jeremy's yearbooks and Madeline's varsity jacket. Proof that I existed, but not proudly. Not prominently. Later that night, I overheard Mum telling guests how Madeline had always been the creative one, pulling out one of her oil pastels from high school. I stood quietly listening, invisible in my own home. In my apartment now, I keep a single photo from my childhood on my desk. It's grainy, sun-faded, and poorly scented. Savannah and I dressed as pirate swords made of cardboard, laughing hysterically. "I took this," she'd said, setting the self-timer on a rock, because someone should capture you for once. She saw me, that one person in my life who never needed me to earn my place in the picture. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if she hadn't been there. Would I have disappeared completely? People think childhood trauma comes from violence, from loud, painful moments. But there's another kind, quieter, more enduring. It comes from not being chosen, from being overlooked so consistently that you stop raising your hand, stop stepping into the frame. You learn to become the background. You learn to applaud others from the sidelines, to nod and smile and say, "I'm just happy to help." You learn to make yourself small. But smallness, like silence, has a shelf life. The day I found out the beach house might go on the market, I sat in my apartment with the news article open, trembling. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't longing. It was something else. A realization. Maybe the frame had always been broken. Maybe it was time I rebuilt it on my own terms. I opened the tab I'd bookmarked months ago. Contact a real estate agent. Not because I wanted the house, but because it was the only place that had held all the stories they kept me out of. And now I was ready to walk back in, not as the ghost in the frame, but the one holding the deed. The email came at 6:17 p.m. on a Thursday. Subject: Congratulations, International Division Promotion. It didn't shout in bold or flash with confetti. It simply existed. A few words neatly spaced, confirming that I was about to become the youngest vice president in Whitmore and Lynn history. I stared at it for a while. Not out of disbelief I had earned this. Every late night, every flawlessly executed strategy, every time I showed up while others coasted. I knew this was coming, but knowing didn't make it feel less quiet. There was no party, no bottle of champagne, no sudden rush of joy, just the familiar stillness of my apartment, the glow of the city through the windows, and the dull hum of the refrigerator. I didn't even smile. Not yet. Instead, I closed my laptop, walked to the kitchen, and warmed up leftover risotto. As the microwave turned lazily, I leaned against the counter, staring at the darkened skyline. I had done it. I had reached a height no one in my family had ever dreamed of, let alone asked me about. At 7:42 p.m, my phone buzzed. Mum. I knew what this would be. I picked it up anyway. "Hi, sweetheart," she began, chipper as always. "Just wanted to touch base about the reunion. It's shaping up nicely, but we've got a bit of a space issue again." There it was. I said nothing. Madeline's twins have really grown. They need the upstairs suite now. And Jeremy's girlfriend has a spinal thing, so she'll need the ground floor guest room. She chuckled like it was all just a quirky little puzzle. "Anyway," she continued, "maybe you could look into a nearby hotel. There's that charming inn by the dunes." So thoughtful, I thought. So generous, offering me exile with a sea breeze. "Sure," I replied, voice even. "You're always so easygoing, Eleanor. I don't know how you do it." She didn't ask about work, about life, about anything that mattered. I hung up. Slowly. Gently. Like placing down a glass I no longer needed. 20 minutes later, Savannah called. "Did it happen?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Holy crap! Eleanor, VP International Division. That's," she exhaled, "that's history-making. Do they even know?" I laughed dry and low. "Of course not." "Why not? Are you seriously not going to tell them?" "Because they don't listen. Not really." I paused, then added, "They hear what fits their narrative. Madeline, the star, Jeremy, the adventurer, Mom, the saint, and Dad, the provider. It was just convenient, quiet, background. But this isn't background, Elena. This is the front page. Maybe. But I stopped yelling a long time ago, Sav. I'm not begging to be heard anymore." She was silent. I don't want to make noise for their sake. Not anymore. Savannah's voice was softer now. It's not noise. It's your damn victory lap. I smiled. For the first time. I poured a glass of Pinot Grigio lit a vanilla candle and sat by the window. Below me, the city pulsed with movement. People chasing, climbing, falling, rising. I wasn't chasing anymore. I'd arrived. In the quiet, I opened the email again. It didn't feel surreal. It felt precise. Like everything had lined up exactly as it was meant to. I did this. I remember the first time I presented at a global summit. I was 29. My hands trembled. My voice didn't. Afterward, my boss at the time, Lance Whitfield, shook my hand and said, "You made that boardroom yours." I remember thinking, will Mom care? She never asked. Success when witnessed feels like flight, but when it goes unseen, it's more like climbing alone in the dark. No applause, just footsteps, just faith. Still, I had reached the summit, and even if no one was there to cheer, the view was mine. I pulled out my leather notebook. On the last page in gold ink, I wrote, Eleanor Brooks, Vice President, International Division, Whitmore and Lynn. Then, underneath, not for them, for me. I closed the book and held it against my chest. Let them think I'm staying at a motel again. Let them assume I'm still folding spreadsheets and fetching coffee. Let them whisper. Because soon, very soon, the truth would arrive at their doorstep. Wrapped in the title indeed, in power, and none of them would be ready. I wasn't looking for it. It found me. The listing came up one night as I scrolled through my usual finance and real estate reports, vetting data for an upcoming pitch. I nearly skipped past it. Then I saw the picture, a familiar blue-grey Victorian on a coastal bluff, its paint chipped its porch, sagging like tired shoulders. The beach house. Their beach house. Our beach house. Mine in all the ways that never counted. Except this time it was listed under foreclosure. I clicked the link. Tax liens overdue, maintenance delinquent payments. A vague but telling description, once proud family property, now in need of extensive repairs. Sellers highly motivated. It didn't feel like victory. Not exactly. It felt like a photograph of someone you used to love left too long in the sun. But beneath that, a new feeling stirred. Quiet. Resolute. I had waited my whole life to belong to something. This house had never let me in. Maybe it was time I let myself own it. Within 48 hours, I had contacted my legal team, established a new holding entity, LEM & Coutures. Little Elena matters, though no one needed to know. My name wouldn't appear in public records. Not yet. I wired the funds myself. All cash. No contingencies. The realtor called it the smoothest surprise purchase he'd handled all year. He didn't know he was handing over a monument of pain. I didn't tell Savannah until the keys were already in my bag. We were at our favourite late-night diner, her third cup of coffee going cold as she listened to me. "You bought it," she repeated, brows raised. I nodded, unwrapping my sandwich slowly. Actually bought it. The beach house. I slid the key across the table. It gleamed under the fluorescent light. "Eleanor," she said slowly, voice dipping, "are you getting back at them?" I looked at her for a long moment. "No," I said finally. "I'm preserving something they let rot, like they did with me." She sat back. Damn. The restoration began the following week. I didn't get the house. That would have been easy. Revenge is easy. But grace takes precision. I replaced the roof, restructured the porch, and redid the wiring that was one spark away from disaster. But I left the hallway creak where I used to tiptoe past Madeline's door. I preserved the dent in the baseboard where Jeremy threw a tantrum. And in the dining room, I had all the chairs refinished. Except one. Mine. The old one. Wobbly. a missing slat on the backrest, the one they always left at the corner of the table where I sat next to the kitchen door. I had it reinforced, varnished, and set at the head of the table. When the carpenter asked why I didn't want it replaced, I said, "Because it's the only thing here that remembers who I was." He didn't ask again. Some nights after long days at the office, I would drive to the coast and sit in the house, alone. No lights, just moon through the windows and the murmur of the waves. I'd sit on that chair and close my eyes and listen. I could still hear them sometimes. Distant echoes of laughter, of whispered gossip, of forks clinking against china. None of those memories had my voice in them. But now, the silence was mine, and that made all the difference. I kept a photo in my wallet, a drawing I made when I was 10, a crayon sketch of the house, everyone outside playing, and me inside behind the window looking out. When I found it in an old box during the move, I almost threw it away. But something in me said no. That little girl deserved to be remembered. So I framed it, hung it in the front hallway. Now she greets everyone who walks in, including the family, especially the family. By the time the reunion email came, the house was fully mine, and I was ready. But that's another chapter. For now, I simply stood on the newly stained porch, wind in my hair keys in my hand, and thought, let them come. I'll be waiting. The morning of the reunion, I woke early. Not from anticipation, not even dread. Just a quiet certainty that today wouldn't belong to them. It would belong to me. I made Colombian roast, the kind Mum used to claim was too bitter, but always finished anyway. I poured it into my favourite mug, matte black no branding, and walked barefoot across the cool kitchen tile. The smell of citrus and ocean drifted in through the open window. The beach house smelled cleaner now. Less like memory, more like clarity. At exactly 8:00 a.m. I dressed. The navy suit was tailored, not flashy. Crisp white blouse underneath. My only accessory, a silver watch I had bought after my first six-figure bonus. As I slipped it on, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hey, it's Jeremy. We're almost there. Is anyone already at the house?" I let it go unanswered. By 8:30, I was reading emails at the kitchen counter when I heard the first clink of keys outside. Then another. Then the unmistakable sound of frustration. "Why isn't this working?" Madeline's voice cut through the morning quiet. "That key worked fine last year," Mum insisted. "Try Nelson's set." A pause. Then the dull thud of another failed attempt. I walked to the door, coffee in hand, and opened it. They stared like I had risen from a tomb. Madeline stood in her neatly pressed lemon dress eyebrows halfway to her hairline. Jeremy held a travel mug and a gym bag, blinking like he couldn't believe his eyes. Mum wore the same beige visor she had worn for years. She took a half step forward, then hesitated. Elena, I leaned casually against the doorframe. "Good morning." Madeline found her voice first. "Why, are you here?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "Because this is my house." Jeremy scoffed. "No, seriously." "Seriously," I echoed. I stepped aside. "Come in. Don't just stand there like strangers." The pause was long enough to taste. Then they moved uncertain, not walking into their family home, walking into mine. Inside, Mom looked around as if trying to catch mistakes. "You moved the console table, it blocked the light. And the rug too worn." Jeremy ran a hand through his hair. "Eleanor, did you actually buy this place?" I turned to face him fully. "I did." "Why?" Madeline whispered. "Why not to make a point?" Mum asked gently. I walked to the fireplace where a framed drawing hung alone. "When I was 10, I drew this house," I said. "Everyone was outside playing. I drew myself inside looking out. I wasn't angry when I drew it, just accurate." They followed my gaze. "I don't want to shut anyone out," I said. I want to remember who I had to become when no one saved me. We walked into the dining room. The chairs gleamed under the sunlight. Jeremy grabbed one to sit down, then froze. Is this... The same, I nodded. All the chairs were refinished. Except that one. Madeline touched the missing slat. Your chair, she murmured. The broken one, I said. The one no one ever thought to fix. Mum finally sat down. Quietly. Heavily. We didn't know you felt like that. I smiled softly because I stopped telling you. The silence deepened. Jeremy cleared his throat. You did all this alone, I always have. Madeline looked up, eyes searching. And you invited us in. I held up my cup half empty now. I didn't change the locks to keep anyone out, I said. I changed them so that next time you come through that door, you know it's not because you expect a place. Jeremy tilted his head. Then why I met his eyes. Because I want you to remember that once you had the key, and you let it rust. A pause. Then Mum reached out for her coffee. Her hand trembled slightly. I poured her a fresh cup. Colombian, I said. She nodded. You remembered. I smiled faintly. It's hard to forget the things we were never allowed to want. Later that evening, after the noise had settled into an uneasy calm, we sat around the dining table. The same table where I used to pass the potatoes, and never the conversation. Mum stirred her coffee, slowly not meeting my gaze. The air was heavy with unsaid things. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, her voice a whisper more than a question. Why didn't you say you were doing so well? I watched the steam curl from her cup before answering. I did, I said, many times. She looked up startled. When? I called when I got into business school. You asked if I was still trying to be the next Oprah. I emailed when I landed the internship at Whitfield and Partners. No reply. I sent a card when I made VP. We never got those, she said quickly. You got them, I said, voice steady. You just didn't read them. Jeremy shifted in his chair. Madeline reached for the wine bottle. I opened my binder, the leather one I always carried for high-level meetings. From the side pocket, I slid out a crisp, slightly yellowed letter. Here, I said, placing it in front of her. She unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the words. Harvard School of Business. She read aloud, voice faltering. Full scholarship, MBA cohort, congratulations. She looked up. You got in 15 years ago. Silence again. I remember that year, she said finally. Madeline had the regional debate finals. Jeremy was applying to colleges. We were all so busy. Exactly, I said, leaning forward now. You weren't malicious. You were just always somewhere else. I stood and walked to the window. The ocean was dark now, shimmering only in streaks from the porch light. You weren't cruel, I continued. You were preoccupied, with lives louder than mine. She didn't argue, but I was still living mine, still hoping someone might ask. Madeline cleared her throat. Eleanor, I didn't know you felt left out. I turned to face her. I felt invisible, I said. And when I wasn't invisible, I was inconvenient. Jeremy tried to soften the moment. We were just kids. None of us knew what we were doing. Then why are you here now? I asked, but because suddenly success makes me relevant. He flinched but said nothing. Mum touched the letter again, almost reverently. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I exhaled, not because I believed her, but because I had needed to hear it anyway. I turned back toward the dining room and picked up a stack of folders. You want to know what else you missed? I asked quietly. They looked up. I laid out each folder. My first product launch, my speaking engagement at the Women in Leadership Conference, a front-page profile from a business magazine titled The Quiet Storm, How Eleanor Brooks Became a Force to be Reckoned With. Mum covered her mouth. Madeline blinked at the magazine, then looked at me. You've done all this without us. No, I said, I did it in spite of you. Jeremy stood and walked to the window, staring at the ocean. What happens now? He asked. I took a breath. Now, we decide if we start listening. Madeline put down the folder and looked at me. I want to listen. I want to know what I missed. Jeremy turned around. So do I. Mom hesitated, then reached across the table and took my hand. We were wrong, she said. Not just about your career, about you. We should have seen you. I squeezed her hand once before letting go. I don't need your guilt, I said. I need your recognition. She nodded slowly. You have it. And for the first time, I believed her. Savannah arrived on Saturday morning 2 hours before the formal reunion dinner. She breezed in through the French doors, carrying a tray of catered desserts, and that irreverent grin that had carried me through more storms than I could count. How's the House of Poetic Justice holding up? She quipped, glancing around the newly polished interior. Stable, I said, placing the last name card on the table. Like me, she winked. Finally. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, arranging silverware, adjusting lighting, and syncing the playlist to the right volume. The dining room shimmered like a dream I once sketched in the margins of my notebooks during lonely dinners. Remember when you invited me here that one summer, and your mum told us to sleep in the attic because the guest room was for Jeremy's college friend? She asked, folding napkins. And you pretended to be allergic to dust so we could both crash on the couch. We laughed, but then I remembered the ache behind the joke. Flashback, I was 15. Honour, role 2 extracurriculars still invisible. There was a parent-teacher night. My mum had RSVP'd but never showed up. Savannah did. She wore my mother's perfume by accident. I had given her a sample bottle years ago. My homeroom teacher thought she was my older sister. She sat through 3 meetings, took notes, and asked questions about my performance. That night, she texted me, "You were the most impressive student in every room, just so you know." I never forgot that. She didn't just show up once. She was there at my college orientation. She sent flowers on my first day of work. She stayed on the phone during my first panic attack in a corporate bathroom stall. Back in the present, I handed her a small silver key. "What's this?" "The beach house," I said. "Spare key, in case I'm ever not here." She blinked. "Eleanor, this place, it means something to you. And now it means something to us." She nodded quiet now. I walked her through the hall, the room with the big window, the one that gets the sunrise first. She smiled. "Yeah, it's yours." Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked the key into her pocket. "You always came back every time, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was painful. That makes you more family than most." Savannah leaned against the counter, eyes glassy. "Do you remember what you said at graduation?" she asked. "No, that day was a blur. You said, 'I don't need a crowd, just one person who sees me.' And then you looked at me." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Well, it's your turn now," I said, "to be seen, to be celebrated." I opened the fridge and pulled out a small cake. "Happy chosen family anniversary," I said, lighting a single candle. "How many years?" 17. That's longer than most marriages." We laughed again, this time without pain. The sun was starting to drop. Soon, the family would arrive in their business casual awkwardness. There would be champagne and gold-tinted apologies. But before all that, I wanted this. I wanted Savannah to see that I had made it. Not just to the corner office or the front page, but to a life where I could choose who stayed and who simply visited. She poured us each a glass of Prosecco. "To chosen family," she said. "To the ones who never needed an invitation," I replied. As we toasted, I saw our reflection in the glass. Two women who had held each other up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The ballroom shimmered with light. Crystal chandeliers hung above a marble floor where waiters weaved through tables like synchronized dancers. The place settings gleamed, gold, rimmed china velvet napkins, and name cards written in elegant cursive. The scent of truffle oil and floral arrangements mingled in the air. This wasn't a dinner, it was a declaration. A declaration that Eleanor Brooks was no longer a footnote. As guests filtered in, the family arrived in clusters. Jeremy tugged at a borrowed blazer. Madeline wore pearls too formal for her usual taste. Mum's heels clicked nervously across the polished floor. They looked around eyes wide. "You did all this," Madeline whispered, taking in the private quartet and soft candlelight. "Yes," I said, "for family." Jeremy chuckled. "You're really trying to make a point, huh?" "No," I said, sipping champagne. "I'm trying to make a memory, the kind that lasts." Dinner was a procession courses plated like art scallops with saffron foam duck confit, with blood orange glaze, and then the grand finale, a gold leaf dessert shaped like the beach house. Savannah leaned over. "Is it too late to cry? Because I might." "Wait till dessert," I said. As the servers cleared plates, I gave a small toast. "To the ones who doubted, thank you. You gave me the fire. To the ones who forgot, thank you. You taught me to remember myself. And to the ones who stayed well, you know who you are." Applause echoed, some polite, some sincere. During the second toast, Jeremy stood awkwardly. "So, Eleanor," he began, clearing his throat, "I've been working on something. A startup idea, logistics, eco-friendly transportation." I waited. "I was thinking, maybe, if your company ever funds external ventures, maybe we could talk." I smiled, not unkindly. "Jeremy," I said, "my company doesn't invest based on last names or holiday proximity. We vet, we analyse, we require vision." He flushed. "Right, of course. But I'm happy to review a formal pitch deck." His nod was slow, but his eyes told a story of someone who'd never been told no by me. Later, as the main course was being served, I noticed Dad watching me. Not with contempt, not with suspicion. With curiosity, maybe pride. It startled me. Had he ever really looked at me before? Later, Mum approached as the string quartet transitioned into something quieter. "We need to talk," she said, serious now. We stepped out to the balcony overlooking the ocean lit by moonlight. "I underestimated you," she said after a long silence. "I know. We thought your choices were mistakes, but maybe we were the ones who mistook silence for failure." I didn't speak right away. "Then, you didn't ask." She flinched. "I'm asking now," she said. I turned to face her. "Why now?" She didn't blink. "Because for the first time I see you. Not just the daughter who drifted, but the woman who built." My heart softened slightly. In my chest, something cracked. Not in pain, but release. "You see me now because I have chandeliers and Forbes features. What if I'd still been the assistant with dreams too big?" She looked away. "Then I failed." "Not failed, just turned your head." Back inside, Savannah passed me a folded note. "From the staff. They've never seen a family so surprised to be impressed." I laughed. Madeline approached, holding her wine glass too tightly. "I owe you a real apology, for more than just what you think." I raised an eyebrow. "You were always the easy one to dismiss. But now it's impossible. You own the table." "I own the house," I corrected. "The table is just where the reckoning happens." She gave a shaky laugh. At dessert, the servers brought in the final course on silver carts. The gold leaf beach house desserts gleamed under the lights. I watched the family react, stunned. "This is edible," Mum gasped. Luxury is digestible, apparently, Savannah murmured. The chatter dulled as everyone took photos, their forks hesitant, unsure where to begin. Jeremy looked up from his plate. Do you ever miss it? Simpler times? I miss being someone's priority, I said. That's not tied to success. He nodded, not defensively, but with the weight of understanding. At the end of the night, I stood alone on the balcony heels, off hair undone champagne in hand, looking down at the ballroom at the family who finally saw me. Finally heard me. And for once, I didn't have to shout. Inside, the music slowed. Dad stood by the bar talking to Savannah. Mum stared at her dessert as if it held the answers to decades of silence. Madeline showed her daughter the view from the terrace. Jeremy typed something into his phone, probably a LinkedIn post. But me, I exhaled. Because for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had chosen myself. And that made all the difference. It was nearly midnight when a soft knock tapped on the door of my hotel suite. The kind of knock that wasn't urgent, but uncertain. I opened it to find Mom standing in her nightrobe, eyes swollen from either sleep or tears or both. In her hands was a small wooden box with brass hinges and a velvet bottom that I remembered vaguely from childhood. Can I come in for a moment? She asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She sat down slowly on the chaise lounge, placing the box between us like an offering. I found this in the attic, she said. It's yours, always has been. She opened the lid. Inside were pieces of me-forgotten fragments preserved like artifacts, elementary school spelling bee ribbons, art contest certificates, birthday cards I'd made for her as a child, and photos of me with no one else in the frame. I picked up one of me at 10 holding a science fair ribbon, standing proudly beside a volcano model. No parent beside me. You told me that was a waste of time, I murmured. Mum swallowed. I was scared that you'd chase dreams so big they'd take you far from us. And you did. I took out a weathered letter, the corners soft from time. My acceptance into Harvard's MBA program. You never responded to this. I read it, she said, then hid it. I told myself if I didn't celebrate it, maybe you'd stay. I looked at her, the box, the sea of evidence that she had watched, even if silently. Why now? I asked. Why bring this now? Because you're leaving again. And this time I want you to know I noticed, even when I didn't say it. A knock at the suite's connecting door. Jeremy entered holding a neat manila folder. Madeline was behind him barefoot in hotel slippers, her expression unusually open. We wanted to talk before your flight, Madeline said. Jeremy cleared his throat and held out the folder. I've been working on this for over 6 months. It's a pitch for a sustainable logistics startup. I know it doesn't undo anything, but it's real. I want you to look at it, not as my sister, as a businesswoman. I opened the folder. The executive summary was promising. Financials were a bit idealistic, but thoughtful. There was an effort here. Madeline sat down next to Mum. I've put my law partnership on hold. I realised I've spent so many years becoming the image of success our family approved of. But I don't know who my sister is. I want to change that. I want to visit you, spend time, learn from you. I looked at all three of them. Once their attention would have overwhelmed me. Now it felt earned. This doesn't wipe the slate, I said. It doesn't unburn the bridges you never crossed for me. We know, Jeremy said. We're not asking for a do-over, just a start. You don't get a fresh start, I continued, but maybe you get a new page if you're willing to keep writing it. Mum reached into the box once more. She pulled out an old brass key and placed it in my palm. The original beach house key, she said. I've kept it all these years. Didn't know why until now. I turned it in my hand. It still bore the tiny heart-shaped etching I carved into it at 16. "You thought it meant you had a home," I said. She nodded, eyes glossy. "But it only means something now if you're willing to be invited, not assume you belong." "We are," she said. "We'll wait to be let in." The next morning, the suite buzzed softly with movement. Savannah folded clothes into my suitcase with a kind of care usually reserved for packing valuables. "So," she said, zipping my duffel. "That was a lot." "It was," I said, placing the box into my carry-on. Beside it went Jeremy's business plan, and on top the brass key. "You forgiving them?" she asked. "Not yet," I said, "but I might be starting to understand them." She grinned. "That's dangerous territory. Understanding leads to feelings." I laughed softly. "I'm not abandoning boundaries. I'm just adjusting expectations." Downstairs, the family waited beside the town car. The driver had already loaded my luggage. Madeline hugged me first. "I meant it," she said about visiting. "I'll book flights once you're settled." "Bring loose clothes," I said. "Dim sum doesn't forgive skinny jeans." Jeremy offered a small nod. "You'll have my deck by Monday. Feedback welcome. Brutal honesty preferred." Mum stepped forward last. "We'll call, or text, or whatever you'll allow." I glanced at the key in her hand, then looked back at mine. "Don't waste it," I said. The door closed behind me, and this time, for the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking away. I was walking forward with choice, with clarity, and maybe, someday, with something close to peace. The wheels of the suitcase whispered across the polished floor of the international terminal, trailing behind me like the echo of a life I was finally choosing to leave on my own terms. Savannah walked beside me, wheeling her own smaller bag. "You know," she said, adjusting her scarf, "this doesn't feel like a goodbye." "Because it's not," I said. "It's a beginning." My gate was still ahead, but I paused by the glass window. Outside, the plane loomed sleek silver and waiting. It reminded me of myself, once overlooked, now impossible to miss. "You sure you want to do this alone?" she asked. "I'm not alone," I said. "I just finally get to choose who walks with me." In my tote, between my laptop and passport, was a leather folder. Inside, a reunion proposal. I'd rewritten the entire model, alternating locations annually. Hong Kong and the US, full transparency of planning and clear contributions expected from each family member. No more passive assumptions. No more default hosts. Everyone earned their seat. I'd signed it with my corporate title, Vice President of International Operations. Beneath it in pen, just one word, Eleanor. Back home, back at what used to be home, I'd left the folder on the dining table, right where our family once sat with unspoken tensions and unequal portions. Now it was their turn to show up not as entitled inheritors of tradition, but as guests in something rebuilt, reframed. Savannah nudged me with her elbow. "Think they'll come Maybe," I said, "but if they do, it won't be out of obligation. It'll be because they chose to." I checked the time. Final boarding would begin soon. Savannah hugged me tight. "Send me photos of your apartment, and the view, and the food. Only if you promise to learn chopsticks." "Girl, I already packed them." As I stepped onto the jet bridge, I felt something I hadn't known how to name before sovereignty. I used to beg for space in their conversations, their celebrations, their memories. Now they would have to cross oceans, borders, and expectations to step into the world I had built, brick by brick, promotion by promotion, heartbeat by quiet heartbeat. The plane door closed behind me. The engine hummed with promise. I took my seat by the window, watching the tarmac fall away as we lifted into the sky. I thought of the room where I'd spent so many childhood weekends, sitting in silence while my siblings debated paint colours, vacation spots, or who got the last slice of pie. No one ever asked what I wanted. Now I had boardrooms listening, investors waiting, cultures to bridge. Above the clouds, with a cup of green tea warming my palms, I opened my laptop and began drafting the welcome letter for the next reunion. Dear family, it would begin. Not because I owed them words, but because I owned the narrative now. A new chapter, a new map, a new table with no chair left empty, and no voice left unheard, because I would ensure it. I used to ask for a seat at their table. Now they'd need a visa to enter mine, and I would be waiting stronger, wiser, and finally fully seen.